So let's talk.
All
I'll
right.
leave it to you and I'll shut up and disappear.
Perfect. All right. So we can see my screen, I am assuming,
Yes.
if no one tells me otherwise. Awesome. Cool. So hello, everybody. It's great to see you all here today. It's so cool to see people from all over the place. That's really exciting. Get to talk to every single one of you about this. I come to you from Humanitec to talk to you a little bit about what we've learned from the adoption of platform engineering. And what we originally called this is DevOps is dead, as you can see with the cool logo. Obviously, it stirred up a few things. It stirred some controversy, but I want to kind of dive into what it really is about and what that really means. DevOps isn't dead. We just need to talk about iterating it and doing things a little bit better. So let's talk about doing DevOps responsibly. So as I said, my name is Mallory Haigh. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Humanitec. I'm an active member of the platform engineering community as well. You may have seen me at KubeCon if you were there in Detroit in October. My background is actually, I'm a full stack engineer, primarily from the e-commerce world and text-based online games. Whole world in there that I've been doing since I was a kid. I've also been in fintech as well as automotive industry. But I'm actually an anthropologist by formal education. So part of what we're going to talk today is about this collaboration of humans and technology and what happens and how we can manage that effectively and make sure that people aren't burning out. It's the perfect segue for me to introduce you to kind of today's core theme. You can find me via email or at Mallory Haigh. You can also find me by that name on LinkedIn if you're interested. So as a whole, the concept of DevOps, as we know it, is a victim of misinterpretation and misapplication. It's a bit of both. At its core, though, we believe that DevOps is more than just a person you hire or a methodology you employ. It really is, at the end of the day, about people management and human interaction. It's about culture. It's this idea of you build it, you run it, and you just have to suck it up and deal with it doesn't actually work. It ends up burning people out and ends up causing a whole slew of problems. So let's go into how this sort of happens and where it goes. We all know that cloud native is dirty, chaotic, and complex. I don't have to tell this group that. It's a very familiar group with this place. Developers right now are wasting about 25% of their time operating apps as the complexity increases. So we're looking at 25 more services and infrastructure resources per application in comparison to how things probably were in 2010, which I just realized is quite a long time ago when you think about it, but that's quite a big scale up in how complex things get in terms of services and infrastructure resources. There's also 5 times more specialist tools in the tool chain to meet the challenges of scaling. And with that also comes a lot more specialist roles, including DevOps, SREs, whatever you want to call that role. There is things that match this idea of specialized tools within the tool chain that meet the challenges that come with scaling. We're also seeing an increase in the demand and complexity of all of these different things, which is driven by evolving global environments within applications. This is just sort of the nature of technology, and we all know how this works. But at the end of the day, cloud native is a really complex sphere. There's a lot of things going on. It changes constantly, and best practices are always evolving. So this idea of you build it, you run it at all costs really does not work. It results in burnout for you. It results in burnout for your team. When this was first said, you build it, you run it in 2006, we think a lot of companies interpreted that kind of incorrectly, and it's resulted in a lot of issues for people at the end of the day. So why are we talking about this now? Why is now the time to start thinking about something like platform engineering? We call platform engineering the logical 2.0 of DevOps. It's about enabling you build it, you run it, but doing it responsibly, doing it in a sustainable way. While we have said that DevOps is dead, what we actually really mean, it's dead in the context of you build it, you run it at all costs. Instead, we want to say this is a stage 2 that is more about enablement, engaging individual contributors in a way that they're comfortable, and really just allowing people to grow within infrastructure and cloud native in a way that is sustainable for them. So it's about you build it, you run it, but do it intelligently. And don't forget about the people at the end of the day that are sitting behind that computer screen. So this chart is really interesting. And the reason I bring it up is because we're seeing a 5-year lag in concepts within cloud native really catching on. And we're starting to notice now that there is a big adoption happening with platform orchestrators and IDPs, things that are native to platform engineering as a whole. So we'll go into that a little bit, but I just like to show this because it just shows that there is fairly predictable cycles of when things start getting adopted. So I suspect we will see this idea of DevOps 2.0, platform engineering as a logical thing more and more in the next few years. More people are talking about it and it's going to keep catching on. So why do we advocate so strongly for platforms and by extension, platform engineering as opposed to traditional DevOps approaches? So for application developers, we find it enables self-service. They're able to do things on their own without resorting to ticket ops, which as we all know is a big complicated process that makes everyone exhausted. It reduces cognitive load, and by that we mean workload. So cognitive load is all about thinking way too much on things that aren't necessarily the best use of your brain power. It's about stress, it's about anxiety towards things, it's about managing your time. Part of that also lends to this idea of platform engineering reducing the amount that someone has to be abstracted away. We enable abstraction at whatever level someone feels comfortable. So a particular individual contributor may feel more comfortable working straight in their IDE, whereas someone else may feel more comfortable working in their console via command line, curl commands, or some other CLI type thing, or even directly within a UI. The other thing that happens is that we increase psychological safety in someone's work. And I will talk a little bit more about this in a second once I hit on what happens for platform engineers and SREs. For these guys, we allow greater standardization by design, which greatly reduces ticket-based ops. As you guys all probably know, that is a big drag to your daily productivity when you're constantly doing every single task for 5 minutes, 1,000,000 times a day. It allows increased focus and getting people back to what they're doing best. And for platform engineers and SREs, you can do things a lot better than just doing ticket ops all day. And finally, again, it's this element of increasing psychological safety. So really quickly, I want to touch on that subject because it's getting talked about more and more, and it's really important to me that we talk about it as well. So it's the ability for an individual contributor to feel positively about contributing within their workspace. So free of judgment, open feedback culture, and a supportive environment that really encourages people to take risks and lead initiatives on their own. In my experience with guiding the implementation of a platform orchestrator in Humanitec, as well as platform engineering as a whole and managing engineering teams, this is such an important thing, and I really want to stress that today. Helping people feel fulfilled and engaged in their work not only drives productivity and efficiency, but keeps people happier. It grows loyalty to your product, to your business, and it also helps people establish healthy work-life balance. When you're happy in your job, you're more likely to take the time to take care of yourself, because you have the time to do so and you have the freedom of thought to be able to be comfortable and in that headspace. So this is really, really important. We've noticed some interesting trends in how organizations implement DevOps. Now we've kind of talked about how it ends up impacting people. Let's look at what actually happens as people evolve along the life cycle of implementing from standard DevOps to platform engineering. So we decided to use a car analogy for this because I think it makes sense for a lot of people. So an immature organization will tell teams, hey, you need to build a car. They'll give you a credit card, tell you where to find a store with the raw materials. When the teams struggle with this, they send in people and implement concepts to help them organize around this. And we call this DevOps. This is sort of phase one. Phase two is a more mature organization. They tell the team, we need you to build a car. They give them their credit card and tell them where to find the raw materials. Hey, I need you to go to Home Depot, or I need you to go to this steel shop to get the steel. They specify things a bit more. When the teams struggle, DevOps helps them get a little more organized, and CloudOps help them find the right material and prep those for them. So, hey, we'll get the steel for you and we'll hammer it out into the right shape, but you still are responsible for building everything at the end of the day. The most advanced organizations that we have found have said, hey team, time to build a car. So what the platform team does is prepare the platform, which is the chassis of the car, and has the developers build on top of the work. So this is the body work, this is installing the engine, this is installing the electronics inside and painting the outside when it's all done. DevOps helps them find structure to their work and order in the chaos. So, hey, let's put the engine in first before we hook up the electronics, or let's paint the car at the very end. Those things that a platform engineering team at an advanced level will be doing. So how do you get there? How do you get started along this platform engineering journey? How do you get your teams into this mindset that will enable them to feel more empowered at work, to have this reduced cognitive load, to be able to get back to doing what they do best? We have 7 key steps that we've identified along this journey, and I'd like to go through these and show you how this works. So the first and most important step, in my opinion, is you have to go all in or nothing on this idea of your platform as a product. If you treat it with this context in mind, you will have a much more successful time adapting a platform to your organization, to your workflows, and to your team structure. So assign a product owner, even if it's only part-time, even if this person is a product owner for another product or another aspect of the application, have them also work as a PO or a PM for this project as well. Your platform team also needs to have engineers, just like any other product team. They should have engineers that are dedicated to working on the platform. A roadmap is also useful, and with that comes user interviews. So understanding feedback from your users about what works and what doesn't is going to be really important. And remember, your users are actual users. So the people that use the platform every single day should be treated just like a customer, should be listened to, should be respected, and their opinion should count. It's really important. So step 2 is not to fall for the prioritization fallacy, and it's to prioritize your platform experience appropriately. The most common error we see is teams that take the first thing that comes to mind in an application and development life cycle and make this their highest priority, rather than looking at everything holistically and saying what actually should be prioritized on the platform. So majority of platform teams will start by optimizing something like the creation of a new application or service. But how often in the real world does that really actually happen? If you take a step back and analyze the net gain of starting an app or service in relation to the total lifecycle of an application, it's really actually negligible. In our research, and you can see some of the parameters we've come up with here, seeing hundreds of setups like this, we've shown the highlighted areas to be the most important procedures to review first, but every organization does differ. So be subjective and look hard. So for example, on this spreadsheet, you will see that what actually ends up being the most time for ops, including waiting and errors, is onboarding new developers. And that also is something that takes a lot of developer hours too. So that's something you can optimize really, really quickly. So that's the sort of thing you might want to look at rather than, for example, spinning up an entirely new environment. It takes a lot of time, but the frequency at which it happens is fairly low. So you have to look at your particular setup and analyze it. And don't be afraid to get a little messy with it. So we'll move on now to step 3. It's a little bit of a harsh truth to see on a screen that you will not be able to build a platform for everything. But we as engineers tend to overcomplicate things and want to go all the way 100% from the start. But it's important to know that you need to start with agreeing on the lowest common denominator tech stack to build your platform around it. So your baseline likely going to be Kubernetes and containers. We will often see these not only focused around a certain Kubernetes distribution and related technologies as sort of the baseline, but also often container registries, databases, and messaging that tends to be fairly common across an organization. Chances are if you use it in one place, use it in multiple. But at the end of the day, what's really important is critical review of your tech stack to find this baseline. This is something we're always happy to sort of advise on too, and happy to look at and answer questions on. Step 4 is we need to identify some evangelists within the teams, especially for platforms. So generally, this is a team of innovators with an app that exactly hits this target tech stack, this common denominator, or most of the pieces of it, and a team that really is ready to move towards platform engineering. So why find evangelists? These are the ones that spread the word about the positives of platform engineering and how it has impacted them within your organization. These are the folks that are going to show and tell. They're going to educate. They're going to help grow the platform to other teams and applications within the sphere and help people get started quickly. They've done the hard work of making a skeleton system, so adapt on it. That's part of why starting with the most common denominator tech stack is so important in this context. So creating evangelists is another way of promoting this psychological safety aspect I mentioned earlier within teams. It allows contributors to contribute. Novel concept, I know. And it's such an important thing to allow people to do in this industry. Allow someone to take the reins and be a leader and to be a thought leader within an organization and give them the power to be able to grow that way. It's pretty cool what happens when you do that. Next is to decide what pieces of your application need to be pre-existing versus dynamic. I could spend hours doing a lecture on dynamic configuration management and the declarative application model, but we have tons of resources on this available at the Humanitec blog that you can review. But really, to put it quite simply, we need to determine what components will remain agnostic across the platform, so between different environments and different workloads, and which will be dynamic to a particular workload, to a particular resource, or to a particular environment. At the heart of this, we have the platform orchestrator, which is what Humanitec is, that mixes and matches the components based on the definitions you set out earlier. So the applications get deployed with very little overhead from manual input, custom automations that break all the time, YAML dumping, and exhausted DevOps engineers who have been absolutely worn down by ticket ops. So that is kind of what the process ends up looking like. And it's why it's so important to actually follow this declarative application model and the idea of dynamic configuration. We can always follow up with some great resources on this if it's new to you, but I thoroughly encourage you to check it out because it's pretty special and really helps this whole model come together. All right, so step number 6. Finally, it's time to start building. Our core recommendations are as follows. So build something that's just 10 times better, even if it's small. We all know that iteration is the key to engineering, and platform engineering is no different. We'll go into this a little bit more shortly. And build where your ROI is. This comes back to effective prioritization from day one. So don't fall for that prioritization fallacy. Understand where the biggest return on investment is going to be for putting in the time to build a platform. Spend way too much time on the first build out of your platform. A solid concrete foundation will hold up a house better than one made of glass and paper. Make sure it is solid concrete, it's earthquake proof, and it's ready to grow on top of. Also, make your evangelist team love it. They're there for a reason. Build it and they will come. Making your evangelist team fall in love is absolutely key to adoption of platform engineering within your organization and the benefits I mentioned earlier for people. It's one of the most challenging parts, but it is also one of the most rewarding. So I encourage you to think deeply about that one. Finally, step 7, it is a very long journey, but it is an incredibly rewarding one. So like Bilbo Baggins said, it's dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. But the door in this case and following the journey is a very valuable one, not just from a financial perspective, but from a human perspective. At the end of this process, your developers are engaged and happy. Your platform team is a group of folks who are now out of ticket ops hell. They're focusing on the more important aspects of their roles, and they're growing as thought leaders within their organization. We've also reduced cognitive load and increased psychological safety for everybody in the engineering organization. Remember, iteration will always win. There's a strong community behind you when you're starting to do this, platformengineering.org. Humanitec is here as well. We are happy to discuss this philosophy more with you, but we also have PlatformCon coming out soon. You guys can start signing up for that now. As also, if you're interested in speaking, we do have a call open for speakers, and we also have tons of platform engineering meetups. So I encourage you to get involved in those. As I said, we're also happy here at Humanitec to discuss this philosophy with you and talk to you about how these things have impacted direct organizations with platform engineering. So with that being said, that's all I have today. So happy to field some questions. It looks like we've got quite a good chat, Luca. Are you going to go through those for me?
That was great. Thank you, Mallory.
No worries.
And I did post the link to PlatformCon here in the chat for everybody. If you guys want to go check that out, we just relaunched the new site. So if you haven't yet, go sign up. There was a long chat, nothing too relevant though, I'm afraid, Mallory.
Cool. Perfect.
Craig, perfect. You registered. That's awesome. So yeah, any questions, guys? Feel free to drop them here in the chat. Use the Q&A. We got time, so don't be shy. Let me just post the link here on the YouTube as well so that people have it. And yeah, as Mallory mentioned, the call for proposals is open until February 28th. So please feel free to go and submit your talk, and we have a committee that will evaluate it. All right, some questions trickling in, Mallory. So Mirza, how would you evangelize platform engineering to senior management? Good question.
Great question. And that's something that at Humanitec we have to deal with all the time, obviously, when we're trying to work with organizations at implementing our product, which by extension is platform engineering. One of the most important things I think is to look at case studies and to say, here's how the ROI on this actually works, and really to focus into not just on the financial aspect, but on the people aspect as well. The reduction in cognitive load, reduction in stress, and this idea of psychological safety. Other things, we've recommended in the past for this is to start that really small project, build it out to show the performance, to show the reduction in steps, to show streamlining of the entire deployment pipeline. Often showing and telling is the best way to work with senior management on this. And then there are also some really good ROI resources on humanitec.com to actually calculate what your ROI would be of implementing a platform type system. So feel free to use that as well, or reach out to us and we can help you with your specific scenario.
Awesome. And let me drop that in here for people that want to check it out. The ROI calculator. David asking, what was the Google IDP from 2016? Do you know?
God, no. You're asking me to think way far
Borg?
back. I think
Borg?
Borg was the Kubernetes precursor.
Okay.
It was I don't remember what it was called, but Borg
Sorry,
was
David,
sort of.
We don't know.
That's all good. I don't remember because I can't remember like last year, let alone
Borg replaced Kubernetes internally. Right.
Yeah.
So that's something else. All right. H. In my experience, Agile Scrum is a huge barrier to any long-term or platform thinking because it's only looking ahead 2 weeks at a time. Any comments on this?
I think if I open that can of worms, it's going to be very controversial, but I've always been a fan of, not adopting something just because everyone's doing it. It has to work for your organization. I think Agile and Scrum sort of thinking has kind of fallen into that. I've managed quite a few development teams and done a lot of work in agencies where Scrum is really important. But I think one of the things, I've seen it both work and not work. I've been in organizations where you're better at thinking of a quarterly roadmap with monthly scrums or something completely different, and not even thinking agile altogether. It really depends on the org and it depends on the culture, because I would say one of the big things is a change management culture is really important, and a culture of like continual feedback where people can go to management and say, hey guys, this doesn't work. Or this sucks. We have to change our thought process every 2 weeks. We don't like it anymore. Being in an organization where that is the culture is how to change those things. I'm avoiding controversy though.
All right. So Craig, is abstracting certain resources a bad idea? Sometimes there is business logic that is complex, like the soup of Istio objects, thus creating a custom controller to manage the abstraction was a solution. But is this an anti-pattern?
That's a good question. In my experience, there are some people that get so angry when you start thinking about or talking about anything abstraction. Like, no, I need to touch like the absolute baseline of this infrastructure. I need to be able to manage Kubernetes myself from a developer. With Humanitec, we still allow that. There's no locking it down. It depends on your organizational requirements, obviously. But if if that's important to you and your company allows it, it's possible. We're never going to say no, you must be abstracted away because X, Y, Z. It's up to your organization, but we allow you to kind of, I call it choose your own abstraction level instead of choose your own adventure. You get to sort of pick where you want to sit with it.
Juicy one. Any opinions on DevOps organizational structure, i.e. DevOps engineers in the same team as app devs or a separate DevOps department?
So again, we've seen so many different setups. I've always really liked this approach of sort of product-based teams or like segment-based teams where there's PM, there's engineers, there's QA, and then often there is a DevOps person that sort of reports to the centrally DevOps sort of sphere, but sits within that team. I've quite liked that approach because then there's someone with the context of whatever that particular team is working on at all times. That being said, there's also value to just an overall DevOps organization that works for a lot of our customers too, that sort of oversees everything and is sort of the platform manager at the end of the day. That also works. It depends on your scale, I would say. The smaller teams are better to be probably a little scrappier and silo into product groups, whereas these larger teams are very much about efficiency across the organization and making sure that everything works together.
Speaking of org size, so Michael is asking, what is the smallest organization for which platform engineering becomes worth it? For instance, total dev and ops team size before justifying it?
That's a great question. And I wish I had some hard data to back this up, but I have seen it put into organizations of 5 engineers. So we have, a customer that is a team of 5 engineers and their CTO is also their ops person. And it works for them. And it works great. And platform engineering as a whole has worked great for them because they've done it from day one. But in terms of implementing it into a small team, most of our customers are 50 plus developers with an average being about 300. It's sort of, I'm going to sound really ambiguous, but it really is hard to say. Like, I can't give you a clear answer. I've seen it work in really small teams, platform engineering, because they started it from day one. Change management, though, is often really challenging on those tiny organizations because a lot of people are stuck in what they're doing. It works for them. Why would we change? It's much more challenging.
Are there any cloud agnostic strategies that Humanitec tends to focus on?
Interesting question. Realistically, as a whole, platform engineering is cloud agnostic, but you may be referring to something specific. So if you are able to clarify, that'd be cool. We don't, like, Kubernetes is the only bare requirement Humanitec has. At the end of the day, we just have to talk to the cluster. What provider you use, what flavor of Kubernetes you use really doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ken, feel free to elaborate on that one.
Yeah, if you want to elaborate, I can go into.
Mm-hmm. Another good one from Michael or Misha, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. How would you define platform portals like Backstage in terms of platform engineering, and how does that overlap with Humanitec? So
they work really nicely together. We are actually working on some really cool Backstage stuff right now, so I will save the sort of the preview and the spoiler on it, but the collaboration between Backstage and Humanitec is quite beautiful. And the overlap is, it's not like there's a lot of things Backstage does that Humanitec does and vice versa. They work together collaboratively. They kind of go side by side and create this really interesting experience for developers. There is stuff coming on that soon though, so I'm going to defer to that because I think it will do a better job explaining it than I can when we can show it to you. So I
can also maybe jump in on that one and add some color to it. So you can think of it as, Backstage being a developer portal and effectively an interface into your internal developer platform. And the Humanitec as an orchestrator is really just the sort of configuration engine at the core of that platform. So if you think about what Mallory was referring to, them working together, you would, let's say, select a service in your service catalog through Backstage, but then when you go and deploy it and figure out all the dependencies that service needs in order to run, that's where the platform orchestrator would kick in through, some sort of integration, API call, whatever it is. And so and then potentially that's something that we're working on with the Backstage team, then feed that data, that deployment data or DORA metrics or whatever it is, back into Backstage for everybody to consume. And so you close the loop that way. But yeah, Mallory was saying more coming out on that. So stay tuned. Raul is asking, could you elaborate a little bit more about the concept of psychological safety? Any scenario to better explain it?
Sure. Glad you asked. This is a great topic. So it's becoming, I think, especially as people started working from home during the pandemic, I think this became more and more of a discussion. So the idea of psychological safety in your job is that you feel empowered to be able to have ideas, to speak your mind, to give feedback without fear of judgment, without fear of punishment for ideas and thinking out loud, and without fear of being ostracized. So, and really what it is it's this culture of acceptance around managing ideas and around suggesting things, around feedback as a whole. So not just individual feedback as a person, but also to the product as a contributor. Psychological safety also relates to stress levels. So how stressed out are you in your job? Do you feel secure in your position? Do you feel that if you say the wrong thing, it may result in some sort of punishment or negative feedback? That is what promoting quality psychological safety is about. And I will say we're really lucky at Humanitec that this is from day one been the way we are, and part of why we will evangelize it, because it really does make things work. So a great scenario is you work in a company where you're an individual contributor and you have a lot of responsibilities on your shoulder, and you see that there could easily be a way to make things better. So let's say it's an organizational change where you operationalize or automate a particular thing. So let's say it's something to do with your ticket ops. In a really bad culture with poor psychological safety, you would be afraid to make that suggestion because someone would shut you down and say, it's too much money, it's not worth it, just do your job. You might feel that if you stopped doing that, if you tried to automate it, that they would put you out of a job. You might feel that that feedback was unfair and it may hurt. That feedback does hurt because it's not really effective. It's not really useful. That's one example of what psychological safety can mean. So it's this idea of culture of openness, of transparency, of being open to people contributing and suggesting ideas to help the organization get better. Because at the end of the day, to grow, often we need to talk about things and often we need to make suggestions. And every single person, every individual contributor should feel that they're able to do that.
Nice. So, I mean, obviously, we spoke about size as being one good indicator of when adopting platform engineering. Mads is asking if there are any other indicators, so complexity of the stack or anything else.
I mean, anybody that realistically is thinking in Kubernetes containerized land, or even monolith Kubernetes land, could really benefit from platform engineering. I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is this idea of people and culture and people management. The philosophy behind it is really about that at the end of the day. So I see no matter how deep your tech stack is, I don't care if you're using on-prem OpenShift, it doesn't matter. And everything on-prem or everything within Azure or all sorts of mix of multi-cloud and crazy complex things that we often see. When you start putting these principles into place, you start getting a happier team. Their workload is not so much reduced, but it's more that the stuff that is really mind-numbing is, and they're allowed to do what they're really good at, which might be being an SRE, which might be being a full stack developer, or an amazing front-end engineer, or someone in the back end that builds other types of developer tools. Get back to what you're good at. And it doesn't really matter how deep your stack is.
What a good question by Mads. A little bit tricky maybe. So how is the platform team funded? By hours saved?
It could be. I mean, so at Humanitec, so when I look at our customers, I often will look at them along a maturity spectrum. And one of the things that's really mature, shows a mature organization, is a fully funded platform team. One of the ways you could do that is potentially by hours saved. I would suggest that you could also just do it by reducing the amount of overhead with things like cloud costs. So often when you implement platform engineering, we also see a reduction in cloud costs. That's something you can look at that ROI calculator Luca posted and take a look at directly what we expect that to see depending on the size of your organization. Yeah, I mean, if you're in a position where you're overwhelmed as a DevOps team and you're looking at hiring 3 more seniors, you may not need to at this point. You may be able to just put that money directly into the current platform team you have and building out this amazing platform that you can all use. So that's some of my thoughts on that.
Totally. Craig, when it comes to compliance and policies, is Open Policy Agent Gatekeeper a widely chosen option, or are there some alternatives that stand out? I'm not sure whether you have context here, Mallory.
That is something that I think our engineers would be able to give you a bit more context on. I do look pretty deep at what our customers are doing, but for the most part, my job is to educate them on Humanitec. So I think that's a great question we can follow up on with some of the engineers and see what they think, the customer engineers.
But also, Craig, drop it into the platform engineering Slack. That's a really good place to start those conversations. So what have been some of the biggest challenges then while implementing platform engineering in an organization?
I would say there's 2. The first is going to be related to change management maturity within an organization. At the end of the day, I always joke that we aren't just platform therapists, our CS team at Humanitec, but we're also change management enablers. So part of our job is to help push change forward. Some organizations are very resistant to change, others are more open to it, especially with tech and with infrastructure. It does get more complicated. So that is a huge challenge, is when we are faced with these orgs that have these change management immaturity issues, how do we help them grow? And one of the ways we do that is by starting really, really small with one team, one single small application that we even as a sample, and we can produce a reusable skeleton out of that uses common pieces of infrastructure and showing them how it works. And even if they, even if sometimes they just start it in non-production environments, it can make such a big difference that it's immediately obvious that they need to go to a production environment with it. So that is one of the challenges. I would say the other challenge too is certainly around developer adoption. Again, you get back to those people that are like, I have done this the same way for 10 years. Why would I touch this UI, or why would I touch this API, or why would I use this workload specification when I can just touch 90 raw YAML files for some reason? I call those guys YAML camels. But those are the challenges to work with too. And often it's with those guys, it's show, not tell. So here is what this actually does from this sample application we've employed within your organization, or that you built out. Let's look at it and see what it actually does. And often they kind of go, huh, that's neat. So you mean I can get back to writing this insane SQL code that I need to spend 10 hours writing for some reason, instead of working in YAML files? And we're like, yeah, you can. It's great.
All right. Can you talk about organizations that are looking to deploy across clouds? So multi-cloud, mostly utilizing Kubernetes, but also on the edge and on-prem, especially with WebAssembly becoming a thing. Basically, how do you abstract the platform and not be so tied to Kubernetes, making the assumption that things will evolve and change over time?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the number one requirement of Humanitec as a whole is Kubernetes. But when we have a lot of organizations as clients who have this sort of cross-cloud approach, mostly Kubernetes. They have stuff on-prem. They have stuff that's migrating off-prem to SaaS. They've got weird little fringe cases. We sort of look at all of those and say, okay, like, let's tackle them piece by piece. There is definitely scenarios where we have done that, talked between on-prem Kubernetes and SaaS-based Kubernetes. We're working on one actually right now, but it's a very common thing. The assumption that I don't want to make assumptions based on Humanitec evolving away from straight Kubernetes, but I think you'll just see more and more connectivity between Kate services and non as we grow. Don't hold me to that though.
Cool. Any more questions? Otherwise, I do feel like we got a good amount in, and we are 2 minutes to the end of the webinar, so pretty on time. So just wait 10 more seconds to give a final chance for people to ask a last question. Otherwise, thank you everybody for your time, for your questions. Thank you, Mallory. It was great.
Oh, I like the cat.
You.
Oh no, it's an axolotl.
Yeah.
Thanks, Martin.
Martin, you should have sent it. You should have sent to everyone so that everybody can see. But that was awesome. Yeah, thank you, everybody. And if you haven't done so yet, go sign up for PlatformCon. It's an incredible lineup. And yeah, if you want to speak, just submit your talk. That'd be great. The last year we had a really good talks submitted from the community. So it'd be great to replicate this year. And we'll see you at the next event next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mallory.
everyone.
Bye.